Good evening and welcome to North Lanarkshire Live, and it's Lockdown Live, and it's day 318. Yes, we've reached day 318. There's a lot happened since last week's broadcast. Nicola Sturgeon came out and made a statement against transphobia in the SNP party. Joanna Cherry received threats. She also lost her job as a front bencher. The Salmon inquiry drags on yet again as information is passed to the committee. The committee refuses to release the information. Craig Murray court case is still ongoing. Mark Hurst has been acquitted. Yay! We still haven't heard about the Section 30 court case being held by Martin Keatings. And of course, Boris Johnson thought it was the ideal time to come up and visit Scotland and go to a factory where 5 COVID tests had already been tested positive. And his response was, "No one will stop me from going anywhere in Britain." Now, that's great for a normal Prime Minister, but for one that said everyone should stay at home, maybe a little bit hypocritical. Which brings us to our guest tonight. Tonight we have Carol Dobson, who is the leader of the Freedom Alliance Party. Hello, Carol.
Hello.
Hello. So the Freedom Alliance Party, do you want to just give us a little bit of background on it? You are the leader of the party.
I am. So the Freedom Alliance Party was started by some Yorkshiremen round the kitchen table last September. Well, they were quite disturbed by what was going on and felt they needed to do something about it, and so they met up round the kitchen table and thought, okay, we need to start a political party. And I guess for us, we've met each other through different groups coming together of like-minded people, and bit by bit I've met some fabulous people. And the point was to say, look, we see that things are going wrong, what can we do about it? And you can maybe go and protest, and you can go and hand out leaflets, and you can speak to people, but ultimately you can't make a political difference unless you're in the door of a political building. So it dawned on us that we would have to try and do that and get in the door of the Holyrood building and get in the door of the political buildings to actually say what we were trying to say. And thus the Freedom Alliance Party is now born and living also in Scotland. And here I am.
So what is it you're trying to say then?
So the Freedom Alliance is integrity, society and economy. We really are the anti-lockdown party. Number one priority would be to say lockdowns are doing a lot of damage. They're causing loss of life. They're causing terrible damage to people's relationships, terrible misery, loss of livelihood. Really the damage is so far-reaching and so broad-reaching and so deep, and the misery caused by the lockdown is so disproportionate to what the lockdown is supposedly trying to achieve. And that has to stop. It can stop really straight away. There are still ways that we can look after people's health and protect people, but the lockdown damage needs to stop in order to get people back to living their lives. And you've just said about Boris Johnson travelling. There are 5 items here on the sheet, and it says that you should have the freedom to leave home whenever you choose, make a living and operate your business premises, freely associate, assemble with others, speak freely without any censorship or penalty, and make your own medical choice. And I think those freedoms should be given. They don't need to be given. They are sovereign right yours to have. Somebody else doesn't give that to you. Should not be empowered to be able to take it from you. It is yours.
Now, obviously, this is a pandemic, so everyone around the world has been affected by it. And I would agree with you that in Britain we haven't handled it very well. We've got horrendous numbers compared to the rest of the world. But in the gold standard countries that have dealt with the pandemic the best are countries like New Zealand and Taiwan and Iceland, where they did a lockdown, but they did a proper full lockdown rather than this quasi-lockdown that we seem to have done in the UK, where we still allowed flights in and out of the country, where it wasn't enforced fully, where we didn't sectionalise up the country and just lock it down completely. So they did lockdowns much more extremely, but for a much shorter period of time. And they've really reaped the benefits of that, and you can just look at that from the figures of COVID cases and as well as COVID deaths.
Okay, so first of all, even the term lockdown is really quite a difficult term. What you're talking about is quarantine, and lockdown is actually a prison term to keep people away. What we're talking about is quarantine as a method of controlling infection distribution, and quarantine can be used as an effective method of prevention of disease distribution. However, you're also then talking about supposed case rates, and the case rates are being measured using the PCR test. The PCR, that stands for polymerase chain reaction. It is a method of taking material, so cellular material from the swabs, and there's amplifications done on the material, meaning you're trying to find the DNA particles or RNA particles of the virus. Now, that's been run for this whole time, not starting right away. It rolled out sort of as the summer kind of progressed, the test numbers went up. Currently, the UK does the highest number of tests per million of the population of every country in the world. And the problem with the PCR test is you're taking this material and amplifying on 45 cycles to try and find the positive result, the material. And I liken it to, I'm sitting here in this office. If I go around the floor, I can sweep up and find some hair on the floor, and I'll find animal hair on the floor because I've got a cat and I had a cat before. And if I really sweep hard, I'll find plenty of hair. But probably could also find horse hair in this room because I've got a pony outside and I might have horse hair on my jacket. But there definitely was never a horse in this office, I can tell you that for sure. But if I use an equivalent analogy to the PCR test, that's what we're finding. Now, on the 20th of January this year, so just over a week and a half ago, the World Health Organization made an announcement and said that it superseded all previous information. They were recognising that running the PCR test on 40 or 45 cycles was too high and was giving far too many false positives. They did not recommend running the test on above 30 cycles. And so that would suggest then that the positive cases that are based on positive PCRs are not positive cases at all. So perhaps then in the UK, the so-called case numbers are not really reflecting truly the cases that exist in this country, and it really has to be subject to question. The inventor of the PCR test made it very clear. He was a Nobel Prize winner, Kerry Mullis. The test is used as a research tool to find DNA material. It was never to be used as a diagnostic tool, and that is what we're doing. We're making a clinical diagnosis based on a very flawed test. We are not backing it up with proper clinical signs, and we're not backing it up with using this in the same way, and we're not even paying attention to what the World Health Organization is now recommending.
So are you suggesting that the numbers in Britain are nowhere near the numbers that they've suggested then?
What I'm suggesting is that the diagnosis of a case is based mainly in Britain on a PCR test. And this is why we've had all this discussion about so-called asymptomatics. Therefore, plenty of people who may have had a mild cold could show up a positive PCR. Some people are testing because they maybe want to go on holiday, or they're care workers. They might be showing up positive PCR and they're being marked off as a case, showing then on a graph somewhere that the UK is running huge numbers of cases. And what I'm saying is many of these are not cases at all. And that is making people afraid. It's making people react in certain ways, and it's causing certain behaviours by politicians which are not appropriate given the clinical cases, the true clinical cases that are out there.
What about the death numbers then? Would they be... Are you suggesting that the death numbers aren't the same then?
The death numbers are very interesting, and it's one of the reasons I got involved in trying to find out more about the science of what was going on. Last year in April, so we saw horrific footage from China of people dropping dead in the street and people being welded into their houses. And I thought, well, it's really interesting because it's extremely rare for any disease to cause drop dead in the street. We were seeing TV of that kind of thing, and it was very alarming. And so we had this virus coming, it was very scary and everyone was terrified, and you're quite right. Flights were coming in from all over the world during that time whilst the footage was going on. And then nobody knew and we were all scared. And then I started to wonder, well, I could see these graphs of death, and I started to wonder, well, people must die every day in the UK, and I wonder what the normal number is. So I had a little look. There's something on the Office of National Statistics, and there's Data Euromomo is another European data stream that you can look at. And it seemed that we were getting similar numbers, and there's something called the extra winter deaths. So certainly last April, there was quite a big spike of deaths. There was certainly an extra number, but every single winter, there's something called the extra winter deaths. And there are spikes of winter deaths periodically. So although in April there were extra deaths with this novel strain of coronavirus, overall are not very far away from where they would normally be, including this current. We've had another bit of a spike over New Year time there, and currently the death rates are falling. I've got some very good material to see daily updates on deaths, and currently the death rates in our area here, Lanarkshire, are falling. So death rates are not so far away. Additionally, currently deaths are being reported if there's been a positive PCR test within the dead person's system within 28 days, it's now 21 days. And my neighbour, for example, her friend's mother recently died. The lady had lung cancer, and then she broke her hip, died in hospital having had failed surgery on her hip, and was positively diagnosed with a PCR, and it was given on her death certificate as a COVID death. Those have lung cancer. She was in her 80s quite some time and had a broken hip, but she marked as a COVID death on the graph. I question some of the validity of these findings.
Now, just to clarify, do you believe that coronavirus actually exists and it is a lethal virus?
Of course it does. And again, it's very interesting. The figures are clearly there to show that the vast biggest majority of deaths occur in people with comorbidities. That is to say, they will have one or two or even three pre-existing conditions. Massive links, very clear links to the massive problem of vitamin D deficiency, which is huge in Scotland, could be so easily tested for and addressed and improved and monitored cheaply and easily. So the vitamin D deficiency, something like greater than 82% of the people who died had vitamin D deficiency. It was one of the major contributing factors to the increased death rate in the Black and Asian minority ethnic population, especially down south, not affecting us so much. And these important factors need to be understood by people so that people can really understand where their true level of risk is. The other thing that's massively important, especially our local area, is metabolic ill health, type 2 diabetes, absolutely a disease that can be so controlled by diet and lifestyle, and absolutely influences your likelihood of picking up this nasty virus and suffering from a greater degree of illness through it, not necessarily death, but being more affected. So again, we would love to be able to embrace some of these health issues and make the difference at source that we need to make, instead of reacting in a reactionary way to it and causing people to be fearful when they really don't need to be fearful.
But you can't really, are you saying that then, like, because obviously New Zealand is kind of the gold standard in terms of the way they've dealt with it, in terms of they've only had 25 deaths related to COVID. So, and they did a full, pretty healthy lockdown. They shut down their country and they stopped well, as you say, they did a quarantine of the country. They quarantined their country off and stopped the virus spreading. Now, surely that's something that the UK should have done straight away, is done a more effective quarantine of the UK and a more effective quarantine of people coming into the country, more effectively keeping people in their home so as not to spread the virus, and then it would have been a shorter term and it wouldn't have been this 318-day lockdown.
So New Zealand was in place or country when the virus was ramping up in the UK, which was January, February of last year, and New Zealand took the decision to cause restrictions there, and I don't know the exact date that they did that.
28th of January.
New Zealand at that point was in their summer season. So their summer season means then that their population would have had a greater amount of vitamin D because that you get it from sunshine. So for a start, their population could have been in a greater robustness of health. They were in summer. They have a fewer densities of population, generally speaking, in New Zealand, say compared to such hubs as London or Manchester, where there's lots of people travelling about in public health. The population density is much more spread out in New Zealand. There's also very interesting...
Well, interestingly enough, though, but Scotland has a very similar demographic to New Zealand in terms of the size of the country and the way the population is spread out. That's one of the reasons that here in Scotland you would say with the devolved nation, maybe Scotland should have shut its borders, not allowed travel between England and Scotland.
Well, so New Zealand, of course, doesn't have a land border with other countries, but I was also about to say that there's some very interesting data that's available. Ivor Cummins does a really good data set to show you this, how the oceanic countries, which is Australia, New Zealand and Papua New Guinea, the countries down there, the distribution of the respiratory viruses is always much lower. The viruses often viruses will arise in the Asian countries, and there's a kind of global spread that goes through Europe and then across the globe in that way. And this is something that happens every year. It happened before with the first SARS coronavirus and also with the MERS virus as well. And it's a pattern that happens with these respiratory viruses. So New Zealand has come out quite well for circumstantial reasons. Now they have a closed border, and what are they going to do? Are they going to remain a closed country forever? So I'm not sure that New Zealand are necessarily the gold, as you call them, the gold standard. I'm not sure that they actually are the gold standard. I think there's question marks over whether they would have suffered the same amount of viral problem as we would have done or what.
Now, but again, Iceland, again, had a very similar response to New Zealand. They are a very small population, but when you look at the percentages, they have a greater response rate than the UK. Now, they don't have that vitamin D summer theory that you have. So,
well, again, if you look at the health of Iceland, the vitamin D thing is, we'll stick with that because oily fish, massive difference in diet and lifestyle. I'm generalising, of course, but the Icelandic people have got a different diet and lifestyle from the Scottish people. Scottish people actually have changed their diet. I understand that in the 1700s it was written into the contracts of the servants in Glasgow they were not to be given salmon more than 5 times a week. And when I was a wee girl growing up, you'd have your porridge and you'd have herrings and fish and so on. So the Scottish diet compared to the Icelandic diet is quite different. And you could also bring here Japan. So the Japanese elderly, high vitamin D levels, protected. And it was found in Japan actually that in spite of the PCR testing went up and kind of levelled off, they were also able to show a rising antibody serum antititer in Japan, as the case from PCR kind of peaked up and went down. And what that showed was that the virus was still going through the population of Japan without necessarily causing illness. So Iceland would be an interesting case to look at the vitamin D status of the general population, which they will be getting through oily fish and perhaps a better understanding of the need for vitamin D and their general lifestyle as a population, back to that thing about metabolic health and type 2 diabetes or subclinical type 2 diabetes influencing the likelihood of getting the disease or becoming ill. And again, Iceland isn't like Scotland because Iceland is pretty isolated out there and they can control people going in. And quite right, you did say that, a very low population density, so there's quite a few differences there.
Yeah, but the percentage-wise, and again, we are an island. We live on an island. The UK is an island, and the UK as a whole could have shut down quite effectively.
So you're suggesting then that if the whole of the UK had shut down completely, then we would have been free from coronavirus?
No, but we would have had drastically lower numbers if we'd reacted at the same time as New Zealand did. I mean, there were still people being allowed to travel to Italy and back again when Italy was at the height of the coronavirus. Quite famously was the Rangers European tie, where fans went to Italy and then came back. So there is that thing of where there was just ridiculous ideas of let's just have free travel, kicking about, go to infected countries, come back, no quarantine. And then I think it was about July last year when Boris Johnson announced, oh, we've stopped flights into the country. And you're going, well, wait a minute, we've been in lockdown since March. And you've still had people coming in and out of the country, which, again, it totally negates the... I'm not disagreeing with you that the lockdown in Britain hasn't worked, but that's because it hasn't worked because it wasn't done. It was... People were locked down except for this person and that person and that person who were allowed to go all over the world, come back, do whatever they wanted. People were allowed to travel wherever they wanted, and they actually did give people too much freedom to actually travel length of breadth of the country. When you've got Prince Charles with suspected symptoms travelling up to Balmoral, and you think, well, that just sets a bad example, and then everyone else sort of goes, well, because it wasn't, and again, there wasn't a law at that point, and there still isn't a law to stop you going out, except that it's seen as reckless conduct, as that weird sort of byproduct law in Scots law. So I'm not disagreeing that lockdown in the UK hasn't worked. I'm just saying that lockdown in the UK wasn't a proper lockdown, and I think we probably would have seen significant drop in numbers, because, I mean, again, Taiwan, Singapore, these are the 5 top countries that have done it, but then you go to other countries that have done well. Senegal, they've done extremely well with it, and they did a full lockdown. So it just seems to be countries that did lockdown are the ones that did better, and they're all coming from different areas of the world. So they've all got different setups, and they've all got different diets and things like that. But stopping the virus in its tracks would be the first form of defence. And yes, if you're saying vitamin D and the evidence is there, yes, that would be a good increase. Do you not see? Can you not see any value in the argument that I'm putting forward there?
Well, first of all, I think it's very naive to think that lockdown stops certain viruses from travelling around the world. There was a good, interesting study actually of some scientists who went to Antarctica to study for a winter season. I think there was 25 of them, and they had to be pretty healthy before they went. So off they went, having had lots of tests for health, and off they went. And in week 17 of the visit, one of them developed a cold, and of the 25, 6 of them ended up with colds. But that was in week 17. So interesting, because he couldn't have been incubating the virus for that period of time. Did it go with them, or was it in the air, or was it in the rain, or was it in the snow? Who knows? 2 hypotheses, and I think that would be worthy of study. But I think it's very naive to think that you can stop human disease from spreading from country to country. What that ultimately leads to is there shall be no travel. There are always human diseases. What you're really trying to figure out is the impact of these diseases. We've talked about that already in terms of death rates. Yes, there absolutely was a spike of death. Now we are in really very normal numbers, and the modelling that was done predicting 500,000 deaths, Mr Johnson was on television commiserating and showing sympathy for the people because we've reached this magic number of 100,000 now. So maybe in 5 years now we're going to reach the it seems unlikely, but maybe in 5 years we'll reach this 500,000 that Neil Ferguson was predicting was going to happen during April pretty much. I think we really have to get a perspective on it, and I think that also people should be given some kind of freedom of choice to decide how they want to live their lives. And also coming back to that thing about where the law stands, it's very difficult for people to understand the actual wording of the law, and people don't actually want to be causing trouble for other people. Nobody wants to be causing trouble for other people. So people are now very afraid. They're afraid to cause trouble. They're afraid to leave their homes. They're afraid to visit elderly relatives. We've created such an aura of fear and restriction and unusual behaviours in the population and mental health issues. It's going to be a long time recovering from that. So I think we've got to talk about proportionality compared to the reality of what's happening to people's lives as a consequence of these lockdowns.
So you guys are standing in Holyrood 2021, and you're going to be standing as candidates in the constituency seats and on the list vote as well. So yeah, beyond the lockdown, because obviously it might be a case of lockdown might not exist in May. Do you know what I mean? It might be vaccines all over, and it's a case of we've got this under control. But so you've got other policies on your website. So political decision making should be devolved locally. Now, is that more for a UK based sort of idea where they don't have devolved governments? Down in England, where it's like just Westminster and then council, or is that talking about taking powers away from Holyrood and distributing them to councils?
The fundamental basis of that would be to say that local people understand best about their locality, and it's one of the reasons why we've really searched for and desired devolved powers to Scotland, and then other regions in England would feel the same. Governments that are far away, geographically or intellectually, from the people are not democratic in their processes because they're not listening to what people are saying. And even if we're sitting here in the Central Belt, we're not really relating to how life might be in Orkney or in the Western Isles or even in Inverness. So it is about really trying to listen to what people want locally and wherever possible, give as much empowerment to people in their local areas to try and do what's right for their local areas in whatever form.
So I take it you haven't quite fleshed out that policy yet. Is that just something that's in the works yet? So you haven't got down to the nails of like taxation? Is it becoming federalised taxation for a council area? Or is it, do you know what I mean? There's no real...
Well, yes, when you're talking about taxation, that's been the scope of what I could discuss. I'm coming into this political arena with very little political prior knowledge and learning. There are other people within the party who would be able to speak perhaps more eloquently about that kind of thing in terms of finance. So we're talking about policies in principle, and we are ordinary people with ordinary jobs trying to make a difference for other ordinary people who are trying to have their ordinary jobs kept alive, learning as we go along and trying to figure out what would be appropriate as we go along. And the policies, we understand there's so many policies and so many things. It's a wee bit like this though. If you're driving home and you've got your mind on what you would like to do to decorate your bedroom or something, and you drive up the road and your house is on fire, you really have to go and put your house first before you can think about other things. This one feels like such a huge priority. Without ending the lockdowns, getting people back to work, getting people back to earning money again, getting children back to school, getting people to hug and hold hands and smile and say hello to people and be able to go for their shopping and just live normal lives. Without that, nothing else can fall into place. So we're not shy about saying that ending lockdown is our number one priority, and we are working hard to give people the background with regard to other policies that we believe will serve the people as best they should be served, whilst listening still, if possible, to what people can come forward, and we want to listen to what people have got to say as well.
Now, obviously, standing in Scotland, especially for Holyrood, there's one policy that has to be really defined, I would say, for the voters, really, and they will ask you this probably quite a lot, is where would you stand on independence? Is the party pro-independence? Are they pro-referendum? Or are they pro-union and against having another referendum? Because if you stood in May this year and you got enough to hold the balance of power to vote on whether there was another referendum, would you abstain, or would you vote for, or would you vote against? Is that something that you have looked at as a party?
Yes, so as we talked about earlier, the party was begun by some Yorkshiremen in Yorkshire, and it is harder for people down south to understand the situation of what's going on in Scotland. And the situation of the referendum and independence in Scotland is very important to the people of Scotland. It's massively important. I'm going to go back to my house on fire analogy though. I think that we already do have different powers. We have this situation where you maybe don't get on very well with your neighbour, and they're kind of a wee bit bigger and wealthier than you, they've got a bigger house, and they keep on parking their car and just over this point of your driveway a wee bit, and it's really annoying you. And one day you think, I'm going to drive, I've had enough of this. You know, they're just kind of, they're not listening to me. I'm really fed up. You're going to drive home, think today's the day I'll have a big argument about it, and that's the day you street and your house is on fire. You are literally going to go in, put the fire out, you realise the roof is burned down, you're going to have to get your pets and your kids out of there, maybe put the roof back on, and then maybe start talking to your neighbour about the problem that's bothering you. So it is going to be forefront of our minds, because it's forefront of the minds of people of Scotland once we get a chance to get out and start talking to each other again. And then the feeling of the people, once they're to cover, form the opinion of where we should be guiding that. Should we be in a situation of having that much power, then absolutely we will be guided by the people to see what we should do next.
Yeah, because I would say with the house on fire analogy would be a case of, that's all well and good, but if your house is on fire and your neighbour is not letting you, is telling you what you can and can't do to put the fire out, do you know what I mean? That would be the analogy there. And as people have said before, you know, we should stay in the union because, you know, these are our neighbours, and, you know, we should help them if they're in trouble and things like that. And people have said to that, well, you know, if your neighbour's house is on fire, you would help them put it out. But if they're throwing petrol on the house while it's on fire, why bother? So you can see the attitude towards that in terms of England and Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland are starting to, especially during the whole pandemic, have started to split further and further apart from each other. The way they've handled the pandemic, also in terms of political viewpoints, England seems to lurch further and further to the right, while Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland tend to stay more centred. The Brexit situation, what's happening there, I mean, we were talking about vitamin D and eating more fish, and it looks like Scotland will be eating more fish because there'll be tons of it not going to Europe anymore. So there is this idea that if there is a pro-independence majority in Holyrood, that, you know, they should be allowed to have a referendum. The SNP are obviously saying we want a mandate to vote for it, so they will put that forward to Holyrood. So it's very important that I would suggest before May 21 that you come up with a stance of, are we going to do it if that situation comes? Would we back it for the next 5? Or are we going to do like UKIP have said, that they won't allow it for 5 years and then they would re-examine it? Or, you know, so you have to, I think you really have to form an idea. I know it's people in Yorkshire that have started the party, but again, it's coming into an election where this is going to be one of the biggest issues in the election, I would say, because we have this whole thing of the plebiscite referendum that people are talking about. If, you know, 50% votes pro-independence, that Scotland should just declare independence. So it is a real hot topic, and it is still going on. But I will leave it there, because it's been lovely to talk to you, Carol.
Thank you.
And we've had a good back and forth. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Thank you, yes.
And have you got your candidates selected yet?
No, we've not finalised the candidates yet. Everything is very much in the formative stage. We've literally just got all the stuff that we need to do with the Electoral Commission and so on. So people are working so hard to bring this together. So more to come on that. Well,
I would just offer an invitation to, if you've got a candidate in North Lanarkshire that wants to come on closer to the election, we're glad to have you back on again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks for coming on. Well, that was Carol Dobson from the Family Alliance. You can find them online at Family Alliance. Not Family Alliance. Oh my God. I am so sorry, Carol. The Freedom Alliance. Carol Dobson from the Freedom Alliance, and it's freedomalliance.co.uk. You can find out information on them. Or maybe you want to get involved because they haven't selected candidates yet. Are you in a political party that is standing for Holyrood 21? Will there be a Holyrood 21? Who knows? But if you are standing, get in touch with us. We'd love to chat to you. And we'll just have a nice little chat about what's happening. But until next week, goodbye.